Hey Jam.dev, my name is Luis Ball and I'm a software engineer with Imgix. Today we're going to talk about building a kick-ass video player using the Imgix Video API. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about why we want to build a custom player using the Imgix Video API. What do users expect out of a modern player? And then we're going to go ahead and build that player together using the Imgix Video API. Finally, we're going to look at IX Player, an Imgix player that lets you get all the features we've built together out of the box. So, first things first, why build a custom player? There's a lot of reasons why you might want to build one, but one of the top reasons is to reduce viewer abandonment. About 39% of your viewers will abandon watching your videos if there's even 1 second of buffering, which is why we recommend obviously using a CDN like Imgix to host and process and encode your videos. Another reason is to keep control of your content. Some of these third-party players will give you a player that shows a lot of ads unrelated to your content or even from a competitor, and sometimes shows content that will lead viewers away from your page into someone else's page. And that's pretty distracting. But what do users want in a player? Well, they have high expectations set by people like Netflix, Hulu, and YouTube. They expect fast playback, high definition, no interruptions. So let's build a modern player using the Imgix Video API. What are we going to build? We're going to add automatic poster generation to our player. So no matter what Imgix video we give it, it'll grab a thumbnail from a certain time in the video. And then we're going to add poster transformations. We're going to use the Imgix rendering API to transform the posters to do things like add a watermark, or blur the image, or add a title to our posters. And then we're going to add GIF on hover previews. So we're going to add functionality that gives user a preview of what they're going to watch by displaying a GIF when the mouse hovers over the video. First, let's talk about automatic poster generation. Let's build it together. So on this HTML page, we have a video tag, and the source of that video tag is an Imgix video. We're giving it a type of MP4 since that's the video type, a width of 100%. We're saying show us some controls, and we're saying start muted. And if we press play, you can see the video plays. Now, what we want to do is have the poster for this video be generated automatically from the video itself. So we're going to use the video generate equals thumbnail parameter. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to copy this URL, and then we're going to say poster equals, and we're going to paste the URL in there, remove the format parameter, and add the video generate thumbnail parameter. So video generate equals thumbnail, and it'll automatically pick a couple seconds into the video for us and set that as the video poster. And there it is. Now the video poster is automatically generated from the video itself. If you had a different timeline in mind where you wanted to pull the thumbnail from a different part of the video, you can use the video thumbnail time parameter. So for example, equals video generate equals thumbnail, and we'll say and video thumbnail time equals, let's say, I don't know, 5 seconds. And now the poster should update to reflect the different timestamp that we've set to select the video poster from. And we can do more with this. We can leverage Imgix's image rendering API to add watermarks, add blurs. So for example, let's just say I wanted to blur the poster for whatever reason. I could say and blur equals, I don't know, 90. And now our poster should be blurred. And you can do this with any of the Imgix rendering API parameters. But it can get pretty cumbersome to have to do this for every single video on our page by hand, right? Copy the source, paste it into the poster, change the format parameter, add the video generate parameter. So why don't we do a little bit of trickery with JavaScript to have this done automatically for us? Let's take a look at how that works. So we're going to go ahead and remove this and save. And we're going to go to this index.js file that gets imported into our HTML file. In here, all that we're doing is storing a reference to the div that holds the video tag, adding a resize observer to that tag, and inside our observer we're going to store a reference to the player, store the current source, and then do some fun stuff. Alright, so let's write that helper function to automatically generate Imgix thumbnails for us. I've got one whipped up here for the sake of time. It's ready to go. Let's run through how this works. So the function accepts a source and a string of parameters. And so if the source argument is defined, we're going to store the URL, delete the format parameter, set the video generate thumbnail parameter, set the auto format parameter. Auto format is an Imgix rendering API parameter that will pick the best image format for the browser in question. And then we'll check, hey, are there any extra parameters that we want to append to this? Imgix rendering API parameters like that blur parameter. And if there aren't, then we'll just return the string. But if there are, we'll append them to the string. And so that's how we're going to go ahead and generate that thumbnail URL. Now all we need to do is go into our resize observer and say player.poster is equal to generate Imgix thumbnail URL source. We don't have any params to use quite just yet, so we'll save. And we refresh, we should be able to see that poster automatically generated. But what about this params argument? What about those Imgix rendering API parameters? We could define them in this JavaScript file and have them apply to all our videos, but I think ideally what we'd want is to set them on the video themselves. So for example, let's imagine that this was a blog post and we wanted the blog post title to be on the video. Each individual video should be referencing its own parameter at that point, not one shared parameter configuration. So maybe the best way to do this is just to say poster params on here and define some poster parameters. So we've got some saved. Let's see what we can use. Let's go ahead and use these. Now these poster params are going to change the video thumbnail time to be 2 seconds. It's going to add a watermark to the top right, and it's going to set that watermark to be a base64 encoded URL of an image, which is the Imgix logo. So right now this shouldn't do anything because the video tag doesn't know what to do with this attribute. It's a custom attribute. We need to go in here and tell it what to do with that attribute. We'll store a reference to it. Let's say const poster params is equal to player dot attributes, and we need to access the poster params and store the value. So now we can pass these poster params to our function, and hopefully if we've done everything correctly, they'll get applied to our poster. And we should see that Imgix watermark. There it is on the top right hand side with that 2 seconds video from the video selected as the thumbnail. So that's a really quick way to use the Imgix video API to automatically generate posters for your videos and layer those posters with the Imgix rendering API to do some neat things like adding watermarks. Alright, now let's take a look at how we can use the Imgix video API to generate a GIF from the video and have that GIF play on mouse hover over the video. So we're going to use a custom attribute just like last time. We'll say GIF preview. And obviously the player doesn't know what to do with that yet, but that's okay. We're about to tell it what to do with that. So just like before, let's use a little helper function here to generate our GIF URL. And now all this is going to do is take that source, delete the format parameter, and add the video generate GIF parameter. This is what's going to tell it to generate that GIF for us. And then we're going to use the video GIF end parameter to tell it about how many seconds of playback to end after, and use the video GIF FPS to give it a frame rate. And then we're going to return the stringified URL. We need 2 more helper functions. These are going to help us determine whether or not the GIF should be shown. So if the video has been played or the video GIF video generate GIF parameter has been removed, we shouldn't display the GIF. So we'll use 2 helper functions to help us establish that. So GIF should play. It's going to check for the presence of the attribute. It's going to check if the video hasn't played at all, and it will say false if the video hasn't been played. Otherwise, it'll say, hey, yeah, go ahead. You can definitely play the GIF. GIF should end. It's going to check if the attribute has been removed, or if the video generate GIF part of the poster, the parameter has been removed by some other side effect, and it's going to tell us, hey, yeah, the GIF should definitely end in these cases. Otherwise, no, the GIF can continue to play. So we use these two helper functions to attach this functionality to our player. So we'll define one more helper function called attach GIF to player. Now all this is going to do is it's going to check if the GIF should end or the GIF should play. So if the GIF shouldn't end and the GIF should play, go ahead and update that poster. Otherwise, set the poster to what it was before, which was generate Imgix thumbnail URL. The last thing we need to do is use this function in our event listeners. So we're going to go in here and we'll say player.addEventListener and say mouse enter. And we'll say attach GIF to player. And we'll say player.addEventListener. And we'll say mouse leave. And we'll say attach GIF to player here. Cool. Now, unfortunately, the simple browser isn't going to show us the mouse events. So if we hover over stuff, you won't see anything happen. But that's a limitation of the simple browser. Why don't we just open this up in a different browser and see what that looks like. So we'll go in here, put this on the right-hand side, hover over the video, and there's our GIF playback. And if we press play, it won't show that GIF over the video. If we refresh and we hover over again, there's our GIF. So that's just a quick demo of how we can use the Imgix Video API to generate GIFs on the fly and set them as the poster on mouse hover. And there's a lot more we can do with this API, and there's also a lot of ways that we can plug in this functionality, not with just our little custom player here, but with most of the players that you know and love. You can use the Imgix Video API with almost any player you can think of and are already used to. So here, for example, is Video.js. And Video.js has been around for a long time. It's a popular player. And what we've done is we've used those same helper functions we defined before and attached them to this player. So now when you hover over the video, you should see the GIF on hover begin to play, and you also have that watermark on the top right-hand side corner. Of course, you can play the video and you'll see it plays just like it did in our little custom player. And you can also use this in something like the Imgix player. This is a newer player, but it's feature rich, and we've hooked it up with the same helper functions to get that GIF on hover, to get that thumbnail generation. And again, it's a pretty similar experience, but on a player that maybe you're more comfortable or familiar with. All right, so let's take a look at what we can get out of the box using IX Player. So you'll remember that we had the GIF preview functionality, we had that auto poster generation done using the Imgix Video API. Well, IX Player brings it to you out of the box. Here we've set the GIF preview attribute. We have that poster automatically generated to that 2-second mark, and when we have hover over, we get the GIF. But we have some other neat tricks under the hood. When we press play and you hover over the timeline, you'll see that the thumbnails get generated for our timeline. So the Imgix Video API is automatically generating that VTT file, those thumbnails for us. We can also do some other neat things with the player. So the player comes with a lot of customization out of the box. We can, for example, play with the primary and secondary colors. So the primary color is the control colors. I want to change those to be an Imgix orange. Let's make sure to add that hashtag in there. And when we save, we should see that update to be orange. We can also set the secondary color, let's say an Imgix blue, and we'll set the hashtag there. And we should see the control bar turn blue. We can do even more customization. So if we head on over to the IX Player CSS file, we can actually, for example, hide all controls. And we do this using a CSS variable. When we press save, the controls are gone. And obviously you can still press the video and have it start, but now the controls are gone. If we want them back, we just save that and the controls come right back. And there's a lot of targeting we can do here. For example, we could say, I think it's bottom play button, for example. We set that to none. So this will only hide that bottom play button on the left-hand side. You can see it's gone now. And if we comment this out, it should come right back. And you can do that with pretty much any other controls that come with the player out of the box. So that's some of the customization you can do. You can do a lot more. But IX Player also has some very, very neat web performance focused features. And let's cover those right now. So let's talk about lazy loading. Lazy loading is when you want your package or your JavaScript bundle in question to defer some of the execution until the browser is ready for it, or until it will affect the user experience the least. There's a lot of tricks you can do this. You can use to make video very responsive, but one of the neat ones is to defer requesting any of the video assets until it's a certain percentage into the viewport. And we actually export a lazy version of our component to make that really easy for you. So if you import IXPlayer lazy from Imgix IXPlayer React lazy, then you can use that component and lazy load it to only when it's in the viewport. So we can do that now. And we'll just cheat a little bit. We'll say, imagine there's a layout where this player in question was way down on the bottom of the page. We wouldn't want that to request videos right away. We want that to wait until it's in the viewport to make that expensive file request. So we'll say style, and we'll say height here of 500. That should push the second player way down. And we also want to give this a different source, so that it's not requesting some cached file. It's requesting a whole different video file, which should trigger a separate network request. So now when we save the page and we scroll down, you should be able to see, I'll refresh just to make sure, that only the top video actually gets loaded. And when we scroll all the way down is when the second video will get loaded. And there it is. It's light, but you can see it, right? There was a square black box, and not until it was in the viewport did it request the poster and actually make that first metadata request and that first video chunk segment request. And there's even more optimizations we could do here. Like, for example, it loaded the metadata about the video. So it loaded the video length, it loaded some information about the aspect ratio, it loaded all kinds of information from the metadata. And that's a pretty inexpensive request, but if you have a bunch of videos on the page, let's say 100, right? All those metadata files could become a little expensive. So what you could say here is change preload behavior. You can say preload, and we'll set this to none. And so now what happens is when the page refreshes, you'll notice if we scroll all the way to the bottom, you won't even have information about the aspect ratio or the video time or length. So if we scroll all the way down, you'll notice it says 0, 0, and we also don't have any of the aspect ratio information. So you have some of that funny letterboxing happening, because what we're doing here to avoid the letterboxing on this top video is saying, hey, we expect the video to be this aspect ratio, go ahead and size yourself appropriately. We do this using CSS, but since we don't have that metadata, you can't do that. So that's a little bit of the payoff, right? There's some funny business going on in terms of behavior before you press play, but once you press play, everything adjusts. But again, the trade-off is better page load times, especially if you have a lot of players on the page. And that's just scratching the surface with what IXPlayer can do. And especially want to give a shout out here, though, to the folks who built MuxPlayer. We built a ton of this player on top of MuxPlayer and MediaChrome, and without their having existed, it would have been impossible to do it. Also, want a big shout out to the folks at Video.js who, way back in the day, made players be as good as they were and set the standard for the rest of us. If you want to play with this, go ahead and check it out on NPM, Imgix IXPlayer. If you need the React player, it's Imgix IXPlayer React. You can check us out on GitHub. We're open source and always looking for contributors. So thanks so much for listening. Appreciate your time, and if you got any questions, stick around. We'll be around for a little bit for questions and answers.
Thanks, Luis, for that great presentation. And we're here now live to chat about and answer any questions the audience might have. Actually, we did get a question in the chat, so I'll get to that. They were also very fascinated by your tooling and the zooming in and out. That was very cool. So a lot of discussion about that. And that was actually, was that the simple browsing? Just to answer that, like, somebody mentioned the simple browsing again? Okay.
Yes. So it's sort of built into VS Code at this point, but yeah, definitely check it out. It's a lot of fun when you're prototyping and stuff to not have to switch back and forth context. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Eric was asking, okay, so he said what he was going to ask about lazy loading. Does this help avoid using a media facade wrapper for media embeds? Web Vitals asked about this for YouTube video embeds and the like.
Okay, so media facade. I'm not familiar with what he's getting at there. I'm not too sure. But what was the second part of that question?
He said that like for Web Vitals, they ask about this for YouTube video embeds that that you avoid using a media facade wrapper. I'm not excuse me. He put facade in quotes.
Oh, okay. I think I understand. I'm going to guess what they're asking here. What I think they're asking is for like YouTube embeds, because that usually comes with its own UI. Like you don't want to rewrap that with another UI. Yeah, the use case for this player is very much not like YouTube embeds. If you're trying to ship the YouTube UI with this stuff is going to break. But if you're more concerned about like performance in terms of like those YouTube embeds are quite heavy, and you don't want to have to, serve all that stuff on your page because it can hurt your page scores. Like part of the idea behind the lazy loading is exactly that, right? To help you avoid the page score hit by loading all these embedded players all over the page, right? Only load it when the viewport is there, or only load it on click. That's the kind of stuff we want to enable for people with the lazy loading. Yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Okay. Well, if Eric's in the chat and he wants to follow up on that question, we have some time to answer questions. We got a little bit of time here. So I wanted to get into, okay, we actually talked about this a little bit at the last Jam.dev, but there's, typically as developers, I think a lot of us are used to kind of your typical MP4 encoding. But like, obviously there's a HLS, which can you get into a little bit about the difference between HLS and MP4 and why HLS is better?
Definitely. And HLS is better for a lot, if not the majority of use cases, but not all of them. If you're very, very, very concerned about initial quality and you have a short video, you probably want to do MP4. But for just about everybody else, you most definitely want to do HLS because of something called adaptive bitrate streaming, or ABS, right? So what that allows you to do is have your video adapt to the network conditions while it's displaying. So if you have somebody like, taking the ferry on the way to work, they start your video with a really good connection. About halfway on the ferry, their connection gets really slow. Your video can change the resolution on the fly to make sure that there's no buffering. It just continuously plays. And then, we'll upscale again when they get a good connection. That's the kind of the stuff that ABS allows you to do. But encoding your videos for that manually can be cumbersome, expensive, and difficult, which is ultimately why we've enabled HLS encoding essentially by default to any video you upload to Imgix. And so when you request your video, it will default to HLS unless you add that format parameter and say, you know what, I really want that MP4 actually. And the player has HLS support, and the same thing with that the IX video, which is essentially just a very, very simple video tag with HLS support built in. So HLS is important if you care about minimizing the amount of data that has to be sent to the user to watch the video, and if you want to optimize for unstable connections or weaker connections or connections that can change over time, and that can really help keep people engaged. Mux did a great study about what happens when there's even just one additional buffering event. It doesn't even have to be a second; it's just a buffering event. So a single buffering event can lead to something like, I think top of my head is like 49% abandonment on a video. So HLS will help you cut that down.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I know myself, like even when I do get that frame rate, the drop in quality, I get frustrated. I'm like, my connection's fine, and often quitting the app and stuff like that. So I can see like, the buffering is even worse. It's just like, okay, I'm not going to watch. So you also talked about obviously the player being available as a web component. Now, one of the things that's coming up repeatedly, I think, in this conference is like the ability to drop those web components, like a web component, into other frameworks, like 11e has WebC, and other tools like Enhance that we're going to talk about later is all based on using web components. I haven't obviously tried the player with those things. Does that make it easy to drop in there for those things? Have you tested that out with any of these newer frameworks?
Yeah, so I can answer in the definitive for part of the question and sort of for the other part of the question. So yeah, it's a web component, and it should work in pretty much all the major or popular frameworks right now. So like React, SvelteKit, Vue, and Next.js. And the way we do that, not to get too technical, but is building off of a lot of the thinking around shimming the window for server-side rendering, a lot of the thinking around how to do that without breaking other packages who have to do the same thing. So like that allows us to do the server-side rendering frameworks, if you will. And then as far as the other popular frameworks, it's just the web component using web APIs, right? So as long as they don't mess with that, then there's no reason why it should break in these newer frameworks. We're obviously still testing out in frameworks that we haven't had a chance to test them out in, but we pretty thoroughly tested this out in what we thought were the most popular frameworks right now. We'd love to continue doing that for every framework that comes along. If it's a web API, it should work. That's kind of the thinking.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I hadn't really even thought about the server-side rendering part. So you said you didn't want to get into technical details, but tell me like a little.
Oh no, I'm happy to. I just don't want to go too deep into that rabbit hole. Yeah, for sure. There's been some really cool, and there's a talk actually today or tomorrow coming up about SSR and web components, which I'm very much looking forward to. But there's been some really cool innovation in that space about making web components work on server-side rendering, because that's been a barrier to adoption for a lot of folks. Essentially, what it comes down to is the window doesn't exist on the server, right? And so you can't. How do you build a web component out without window APIs or without the APIs on the client? And so some people will shim them, so it's just a no op, right? You reach for define custom element, and it just doesn't do anything. You have that placeholder HTML, if you will, just on the page, but it's not upgraded. Some people have gone even further and actually built those APIs into like Node itself. Like the package comes with a way to have that HTML be all parsed out for you. So on the server, like you get the full like shadow DOM, like everything in there. There's things like the declarative shadow DOM API they're trying to come out with. But the simpler explanation here is, I think the simplest approach that everybody's shooting for right now is a combination of templating and shimming. So the shimming is essentially if the window isn't available to you on the server, if some of these APIs that web components need to exist aren't available, shim them and make them into the bare bones, even just no ops, so that you don't have any errors that will break the execution of the code. The templating is a way to generate as much of the HTML as you can prior to any JavaScript execution, so you can avoid things like content layout shifting. And so GitHub template parts is one of the packages that does this really well. And what you can do there is essentially you feed it your template tag or your web component. How do I say it? How to not say components? Your web component template, right? Your HTML, and it will generate an actual HTML tag for you from that. Sometimes a bunch of libraries do it differently. Sometimes it's a string. Sometimes it actually shoots this stuff into whatever framework is outputting to the client, like an actual HTML. But the idea is to render as much HTML as possible without having to wait for the whole JavaScript bundle to execute to even get those placeholder elements inside of your web component. So, for example, with the lazy loading stuff, one of the reasons that works is because even though the JavaScript that has to execute to upgrade that custom element to be an actual player hasn't actually executed, because it's right at the bottom of the viewport, like it's lazy loading, you still have DOM nodes in there that you can style. You can still give them backgrounds. You can still give them, pretty much any CSS property you can think of. And so that's like the bare minimum for SSR. Is like at least when the HTML gets sent from the server to the client, it knows what to do with that part of your web page. So you don't have that nasty content layout shifting. You can give it aspect ratios. You can give it minimum heights. And so that's kind of the starting point now. Where things are going in the future is really exciting. Like you hinted at, like there's a lot of tooling coming out that will make the templating a lot better, especially as that spec starts to stabilize a little bit. So I said a lot of words. Right. Hopefully some of that was clear.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even though it's probably like way over my head in terms of I haven't done a lot of web component development, but I think the talk you're referring to is actually today. At the end of the day, Simon McDonald's doing that's the enhanced framework that came up earlier. It's going to be talking about like the SSR with web components, which because I think that's all very new. I think I haven't. It seems like not a lot of frameworks necessarily handle web components in SSR, which is kind of one of the things that makes that one unique. So it's interesting that you all have already kind of optimized for that aspect of it. Pretty cool. So, and I guess another question I had was you talked a lot about video, but obviously you all do images too. So all of those like those image manipulation things that you're showing for video, I mean, I can use those for images as well. I'm certain like being able to do like lay over a graphic or add text to an image to like generate banners, for instance, on the fly or things like that.
Yeah, so anything that you saw there, you can definitely do to your images as well, right? So if you anything that lives in your asset bucket, if we will, right, video or image will get consumed by us. And so if it's a video, you can use the video API. But if you're generating a poster using the video API, then you can use the same APIs you've been using with Imgix to do things like add watermarks, superimpose and layer images, change the color, use the auto enhance parameter to make your colors pop, things like that. There's a lot of really, really powerful parameters that are accessible to you through the rendering API. And I mean, I can give you some examples of crazy things that people do with it. Like some people have rolled their own like OG image generation, the OG image being the image that like social generates when you share URLs, right? Some people have rolled like an automatic OG image generation all by just layering our params in a certain way. And some people have done things like, swap out car colors on the fly by, using masks and watermarks correctly on our rendering stack. And so if you get creative with it, you can do some really interesting stuff, which I think if you have ever had to hand roll your own like YouTube thumbnails or, try to A/B test click-through rates for your videos, I think you'll appreciate how nice it is to be able to, on the fly, update those posters in response to that kind of information that you're getting without having to like bring that thing back to Photoshop or something and update your poster image.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned on the chat that like one of the reasons I'm really interested in this is just because, technically, so I've been running CFE Dev for 5.5 years now. It's been online the whole time. So like I have this fairly significant archive of videos. It's like, I think now 200, maybe 250 videos. And this is one of the things I think about because right now I serve them all up as YouTube embeds, or I have some older ones that are still sitting in Vimeo that I need to move over. And I deal with some of the problems you brought up, which is like, okay, so my viewer comes and sees my video, but then they're actually pushed into a video by somebody else that has nothing to do with my site and that I gain nothing out of. So it's definitely an issue. I think a lot of us who are trying to kind of create content like this deal with. So anyway, I didn't have a question there per se, but just more of like a comment. Like I know the pain of dealing with the YouTube embed and the Crowdcast embed and all these other embeds. Actually, if I get any complaints from when I run like the Lighthouse on my site, it usually has to do with video player embeds. I mean, is that something like, how does your player actually, now that brings me to a question, how does your player deal? Like, how does it stand up if I do like a Lighthouse score on that player? Sounds like with the lazy loading, it should do really, really well.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you configure it and what your priorities are. Because sometimes taking a hit, and I'm going to hot take here, but sometimes taking a hit on a Lighthouse score is worth it if you really care about certain content coming first. And so, like, if you defer the first image on your page that everyone's going to see to load, and instead they see like a black box, that's not a great experience. So of course you want that to come first. So it depends on how you configure stuff, right? Like if you want to optimize for your page speed scores, this player will let you do that to your heart's content, right? Load nothing until there's user interaction, essentially just a div tag with some CSS. But if you want to load just the metadata, the length of the video, the aspect ratio, and the poster, like you can do that as well, and wait for the on click to actually load the video file. It all depends on what you're optimizing for. Ultimately, we wanted to put as many tools in your hands to optimize as much as you wanted for page speed, but also leave those escape hatches for folks who want that content there as fast as possible. So I think that people who are coming from things like YouTube embeds, people who are coming from things like Vimeo embeds will be really pleased with just how customizable that aspect of things are. Because, I've done my fair share of video embedding and video creation in the past, and that's been one of my biggest frustrations too, is like, do I really need to go and wrap this in some kind of like event listener for like on click to make sure it doesn't load right away, because it's killing my page speed scores, so.
Right. And actually, I'm assuming same with the images, like you serve up the format that the viewer can see. You use newer image formats if they're on a modern browser, but you can fall back to older image formats, or do you know?
So you're talking about auto formatting, right? Yeah, for images we do that with the format equals auto, but not for video. For video, we default to HLS, which has great support on mobile, not so great support on some of the desktop browsers, which is why our player and our video component both roll with that support in case your browser doesn't have it built in. But if you need a different format, right now we support MP4, which is pretty much, if not, I think almost certainly universally supported. In terms of like newer formats, there's a lot going out there, right? You've got like Dash and all this stuff, and always keeping an eye on that and trying to expose as many as we can. But for now, we're HLS and MP4.
Right. Yeah, I was actually. That's good to know. I was actually thinking that on the image side, because it is another thing that I get dinged for. It's like, use WebP instead of JPEG,
right.
but or ping. So I'm assuming it'll automatically switch that if you set it.
Oh yeah.
That. Okay.
On the image side, if you do the format equals auto parameter, it will intelligently decide, okay, what browser are you on? What's the best format to serve that browser, and give that to the browser.
Excellent. That's good to know. This is. Keeping in mind, this is it's a side project for me. So like often this is my weekends, is trying to figure out like, okay, what's the next issue I'm going to upgrade on this site? So, this has been one that, okay, I know I probably need to deal with the video, and I need to deal with the images, and trying to solve that problem when you have 5.5 years worth of content to like go back on to. It's not an easy thing to solve. So. But yeah, it sounds like this would be a way for me to do it.
Definitely, yeah. And side projects usually bring the best feedback because people care a lot about them. So if you run into any problems, definitely hit us up on GitHub. Always looking at issues for pull requests.
Awesome, that's great. Well, I didn't see any more questions from the audience, so I know we're just a few minutes early here, but we're gonna go ahead and take a short break. So thank you, Luis, for your presentation. I look forward to trying this out and seeing if it works for CFE. And I think, it looked like there was a lot of people asking questions about the player and such. So definitely it's something that's important to them as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to hear more about what components SSR and everything else. Happy to be here.